Today I'm going to try to make a rationale for why the exploration of planetary caves should be a top priority in astrobiology, our studies of Mars, but also in the context of NASA's Moon to Mars initiative, and for both science and exploration. I am with the SETI Institute and the Mars Institute. These are two nonprofit research organizations, but I also have a cooperative agreement with NASA. And so NASA is acknowledged, but the views shared here are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of NASA. We've landed on Mars in multiple occasions. The first successful landing was that of Viking Lander 1, followed by Viking Lander 2. And those two missions went about the search for life in a bold way. They were looking for extant life, life that might be still alive at the Martian surface. And the outcome is that essentially of the biological experiments, at best, the label release was somewhat ambiguous, but the results were overall judged to be negative. Following the Viking mission, given the harshness essentially of the Martian surface and the fact that the results were considered negative overall, the subsequent efforts to explore the surface of Mars and search for life have focused on signs of past life and a better understanding of paleo habitats on Mars, as opposed to pursuing the search for extant life. And so this is a map showing you the 17 missions that have essentially landed or contacted the surface of Mars since the beginning of the era of landers. And so the very first one was Mars 2 in 1971. And this goes all the way to the latest lander, Zhurong by China, which landed in 2021. So the important point here is that beyond Viking Lander 1 and 2, there has never been a search for extant life at the surface of Mars. I mean, other than just through imaging and keeping an eye open in what we see in the landscape. These missions have focused on characterizing the paleosignatures or paleobiosignatures that might be found at the Martian surface, and also paleohabitats as environments to sort of characterize better. And this is sort of the summary of the best sign of life that was ever found on Mars, which is essentially a technosignature, no fossils, let alone any extant life form. And so I think that we have somewhat lost track of a really important thing that we're after when it comes to the surface of the exploration of the surface of Mars and the search for life there, which is that we're trying to find not just life on Mars, but alien life. And I think it's really important to remember that. Shown here is in the middle the phylogenetic tree of life on Earth. And you see the three domains of life: the bacteria, the eukaryotes, the archaea. This is essentially a family tree that connects the various life forms and families of life that exist on Earth through their shared or similarities in this particular case, 16S ribosomic RNA. But you can think of this as a sort of a DNA proximity tree. So the closer you are from another branch, the more similar you are. In other words, the more common genetic material you share, the farther apart, the less. But the key message, though, is that all forms of life on Earth share at least some important common genetic signature. And also, all forms of life on Earth use only the 20 left-handed amino acids that we all use for proteins. There are some life forms today that also use a couple more amino acids, so 22. But essentially, it's quite remarkable how uniform the recipe for Earth life is. And that is usually interpreted as being due to the fact that we all share a common ancestry, which of course we don't have a fossil record of anymore. but that is sort of indicated by the root here of this tree of life. So this is a version from 2016 by Hug et al. It was originally put together by Carl Woese. It's essentially the tree of Earth life. When we say we're looking for life on Mars, what we're really talking about is trying to find an example of alien life, a form of life that would not plot onto this tree, or a form of life that is not of the Earth. And so what we imagine or envision is that there would have been a separate origin of life on Mars, with maybe its root ancestry, and that we would be finding biosignatures from life forms that would have evolved independently of life on Earth and originated as well independently from life on Earth. And so that is the key thing. This is the reason why we are in this search for life on Mars. We want to find the first example of an alien form of life, because if we do find that, that of course is what will have implications for the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, there are two key considerations here in the search for alien life on Mars. One is that the Earth and Mars are not isolated systems. So we have Mars meteorites on Earth. There are likely Earth meteorites on Mars. And life on Mars and on Earth might share, therefore, a common origin. You can imagine life starting on Earth and the Earth being hit by asteroids and comets, Earth rocks reaching Mars, inseminating Mars in some sense, and yielding life evolving on its own on Mars from that point on. But ultimately, you would still be dealing with terrestrial life, and therefore finding life on Mars in that scenario would not be finding alien life. You would just be finding exported Earth life. And so finding life on Mars is not enough to really answer this question of whether or not there might be alien life on Mars. You have to really determine its alienness. And so therefore, you need to find extant life. And that's because in order to determine that a life form that you find on Mars is alien compared to Earth life, you have to show that it is not part of our genetic tree of life. You have to therefore do genetics on it, and therefore it has to be still alive, or at least dead for not a very long time, not long enough for the genetic signature to be erased or damaged beyond recognition. So it's really essential that in order to find and determine that we have alien life, that we actually go after extant life, not paleo biosignatures of life. I often, say that if, even if Perseverance were driving through a road cut and you could see giant bones sticking out of the cliff face, you could not be sure that you have found alien life. I mean, you definitely write a paper in Nature, and if they don't want it, you can try Science. But the key thing here is you are not certain, just because you found some form of life on Mars, that it is not somehow just derived from the same origin as life on Earth. Okay, and so this is really something that is super important. So I feel that we should correct our course in the search for life on Mars to being more overtly about finding extant life, because once again, that's the only way to determine that it would be alien. So the surface of Mars today, in terms of our chances of finding extant life on it, are really difficult. I list here a series of biocidal factors, things that will essentially contribute to killing at least Earth-type life. There are some form of terrestrial extremophiles that can survive one or a few extreme factors of the Martian surface environment, but not the entire combination of them all. And so the surface of Mars, as it is today, would be lethal to any microorganism that would be exposed to the full brunt of it. Now, as soon as you enter the subsurface, things are entirely different. And I have in my abstract a table that quantifies this, the sort of the depth at which different biocidal factors are attenuated. And you should take a look at this. So beyond 10 meters or so, things are much better in terms of radiation impact. Certainly micrometeoric bombardment, you're out of trouble. The temperatures as well become much more uniform throughout the day and night, etc. Now, in order to access the subsurface, where conditions are much better for you to find extant life, there are essentially two approaches. You either do deep drilling until you reach liquid water, because the assumption here is that you still need liquid water to be able to metabolize and be vibrant. And so this is something that would take us to drill anywhere from 2 to 5 kilometers of depth, depending on thermal models and the sort of deeper structure of the mega regolith on Mars. So Steve Clifford, for example, has some really good models of how deep you would have to go in order to encounter the water table, the liquid water table. Um, and of course, 2 to 5 kilometers of drilling, that is commensurate with terrestrial deep drilling, but completely out of reach, of course, on Mars, because in particular of the mass and also the temperatures of the rocks that you would have to go through, starting at minus 70 degrees C at the surface, to get down to the water table. So this would be a huge challenge to do with conventional drilling methods, although there is some promise with an approach called plasma drilling. I've worked with some colleagues in Norway at Zaptec on possibly implementing plasma drilling someday on Mars. There are other efforts going on as well that are considering plasma drilling. So this is sort of a lightweight, high power approach, and you would use compressed CO2 from the Martian atmosphere to flush out the cuttings. That could be a way eventually down the road to get to deeper Mars, but this is sort of the hard approach to going underground on Mars, which is drilling. A much better approach is to take advantage of natural cavities at the surface of Mars. So this is a cave that is revealed on the floor of a small impact crater on the flanks of a shield volcano. This is Pavonis Mons volcano on Mars, and you can see this cavity that presumably was opened up by the impact event, and it's about 40 meters across the cavity opening, the skylight, and beneath that there's either a lava tube or a sort of a lava chamber underneath the skylight. So there are lots of caves on Mars. Over 1,000 have been inventoried, largely the result of an effort led by Cushing at the USGS. Most caves cluster in two provinces on Mars, two provinces, Elysium and Tharsis. Tharsis by far has the largest number of caves, although Elysium is an important volcanic center as well. What's important is that volcanism on Mars might still be active, even if we're not seeing anything actively, erupting right this minute. Horvath et al. Had a very interesting discovery reported in 2021, which is this very fresh-looking fissure eruption deposit, a pyroclastic deposit in Elysium, which has an estimated age of maybe 50K years or so. So this is very, very young and would imply that volcanism is still active on Mars today. Tharsis also has signs of recent volcanism. And first of all, these giant volcanoes have been, for some of them, active throughout the bulk of Martian history. But the youngest eruptions reported on in Tharsis are of order 1 million to 10 million years old. So this is, of course, geologically still pretty young. All right. And on the flanks of these giant volcanoes, in this case here, Pavonis Mons, you see lava tubes. This is Mars Express data, a beautiful image of breached lava tubes, and also lava caves. This is a skylight or a pit crater on the flanks of Arsia Mons. It's called the Jeanne Pit, and it's approximately 150 meters across. There's a lower limit of 175 meters of depth beneath this 150 meter diameter pit. So the point here is that on Mars we have subterranean settings that are isolated from a lot of the biocidal elements that prevail at the very surface of Mars. You are shielded now from radiation. You have more constant temperatures. If the volcanoes are still active, they might be venting water vapor, which, if the cave is very cold, would condense and build up ice inside. Uh, these are settings that might even be warm and have thermal anomalies associated with them, although that's speculative. We don't know that for a fact. But in any case, caves represent on Mars an entirely different realm from the surface. And so essentially by exploring a cave on Mars, you get two planets for the price of one. You are exploring an entirely different realm by entering a cave. And of course, this is a setting that is much more favorable a priori for finding possibly extant life on Mars. Now, there are ways to prepare for this, which should be our ultimate goal on Mars, to explore these caves. We have ice-rich caves on Earth that are particularly interesting. There is less and less ice in ice-rich caves in the United States, but this is an example from Iceland where there's still a lot of ice. We actually mapped out the ice inside this particular cave in eastern Iceland, Lofthyllir. It's actually a cave that's relatively often visited, but people had yet to really map out the ice in there, and so we went in and took care of that with a lidar as well, on a drone. But the point is, an interesting observation was that there are microglaciers. There are masses of ice inside these caves. I mean, the origin of the ice could be very different from how ice might be found inside a lava tube or underneath a pit crater on a volcano on Mars. But once you have a buildup of ice, it's interesting to see what happens to it. And in this case, the ice flows. Of course, we're on Earth, so temperatures are quite a bit warmer. And you have microglaciers, ice streaming inside these caves, over time. And so it'd be interesting to see if, given a lot longer time frame, even though the ice might be colder, you might not also have viscous creep and ice flow inside caves that are ice rich on Mars. Now, another place to get ready for Mars is the moon. And as Robert Wagner will, I think, tell us later today, there are over 300 pits that his team have identified at the surface of the moon. This is just an example. This example is interesting because the vast majority of these 300 pits that have been identified, low latitudes, it's a sampling bias, presumably from the software that was used to actually identify these pits in the first place. They track the motion of this patch of sunlight on the floor of the pit as it moves over time in different images. And so this is only possible if light actually hits the floor of the pit, which means that you have to be at relatively low latitude for that, beneath latitudes of 50 to 60 degrees or so. Beyond that, it's very hard to use this automated technique to find pits on the moon, but they must exist nevertheless. And so I went on a search for pits at high latitudes, a sort of a manual search. I felt it was important to do this because in low latitude pits, given that sunlight does hit their floor, you are very unlikely to have temperatures that are going to be cold enough, since the rocks will heat up during the day on the floor of the pit and radiate their heat into the rest of the cave. You are very unlikely to have temperatures that are low enough to allow volatiles to accumulate, to get cold trapped in a low latitude pit on the moon. But there are some candidate pits that you can convince yourself might exist at high latitudes on the moon. This is Philolaus crater. It's at 72 degrees north. At this point, sunlight no longer hits the floor of a pit if it were there. The pits that were reported here are found in exactly the same type of geologic setting. They are on the impact melt floor of Copernican age craters. Here are some examples. And note that on the left, sunlight is coming from the bottom of the image. Okay, so if you look at, for example, pit number 1, gives you the impression, if you look at it wrongly, that you have a raised rim that's being lit from the top, but that's not the case. You're looking at a sort of a curving down rim of the pit at the bottom of a funnel with the sunlight coming from the bottom of the image. Anyway, these pits have floors that would be never lit by sunlight. They're essentially small scale, permanently shadowed regions. The coldest part of these pits, or lava tubes, if there are lava tubes underneath them, would be immediately underneath the skylight, underneath the pit itself, where any heat would be able to radiate upwards into the universe. And so as long as there's not too much indirect lighting warming up the entrance of these caves, ice might be able to accumulate in some of these permanently shadowed regions. So to explore these places on the moon, robotic exploration, a fantastic and exciting opportunity in the context of Artemis and our return to the moon. So hopefully we will be doing things like this. I'm pursuing with JPL the study of Globetrotter. And then, of course, human exploration is what we all hope to see happen eventually. And Artemis should target eventually caves on the moon as well, and ideally caves at high latitudes on the moon where there might be ice in them. This would not be something really that out of the ordinary, since even during Apollo we have explored lava tubes, except that this one was a sinuous rill and was essentially a fully collapsed lava tube. But Apollo 15 did target a lava tube that was collapsed. And what we're saying here is Artemis could start studying lava tubes that are still not collapsed. And that would be really exciting and be a good thing to do in preparation for Mars. We have another paper in this conference. I just have one slide to advertise it. It's actually supposed to be a poster, but we're going to have it as a print-only presentation. But please do read it. It's about the first field test that we conducted of a EVA suit system and science operations in combination with the suit in a through a skylight and into a lava tube. Of course, many people have done work with astronaut training and also taken suits into caves before us. But this was the first time that a spacesuit manufacturer, Collins Aerospace, formerly Hamilton Sundstrand, actually looked into the requirements of caving in a cave on Earth. So this is giving us some sense that things are moving forward tangibly when you have a spacesuit manufacturer looking actually at requirements for caving. So in summary, finding alien life is the top priority for astrobiology and planetary science. To establish alienness of life, you must do genetics on it. To do genetics on it, you have to find it alive. On Mars, to find life that's alive, extant life, you have to go underground, at least most likely. Mars caves are the easiest access to the underground of Mars, and Mars volcanic caves may offer shelter, warmth, moisture, plus nutrients, and may be suitable for extant life, at least much more so than the surface of Mars. And so therefore, to really address our astrobiology priorities seriously, we should be prioritizing the exploration of caves on Mars, volcanic caves, to find hopefully extant life, extant alien life. Now, the moon and the Earth can help. Lava caves on the Earth and the moon, especially the ice-rich ones, offer an opportunity to test and train for Mars caves. The candidate high-latitude caves on the moon, if confirmed, would be permanently shadowed regions and might be H2O ice-rich. And confirming and exploring high-latitude caves on the moon should be also a top priority for Moon to Mars. Thank you very much.